Okay, it's 20:001, so we can start. Welcome everybody. Perek Bet, and let's jump right into it. So I gave you some sources. We're going to focus on those psukim that I outlined, but if something important comes up, chat or raise your hand, and we'll try to address it. Okay, so we're in the first verse in Perek Bet. Achar dvarim ha'ele, kashocha mat hamelech Hashverosh zachar et Vashti v'et asher aseta v'et asher nigzar aleya. So after these things, right, there's a period of time elapsed, right? If you remember the decree of Memuchan, who we assume to be Haman, was not just to get rid of Vashti, but to crown someone instead of her. So it appears that that didn't take effect immediately. I mean, the first part did, but the second part of appointing someone else had to be remembered, which is interesting. So this is after his anger abated, after the anger of the king Ahasuerus abated. Um, it can be read that it took his anger all that time to abate. Again, it doesn't tell us how much time elapsed, but I guess he was pretty angry. We said it makes sense in terms of what he was trying to accomplish. It was sort of like deflated his whole 187-day party. Everything that he'd planned for went down very quickly with what Vashti did. In any case, yeah, so he remembered Vashti, he remembered that which she had done, and he remembered what was decreed against her. Um, and presumably this leads into the next verse. In other words, he's missing her. Many Mefarshim say that he was upset that he was influenced wrongly by Memuchan to get rid of his wife. I think the Malbi in particular says he was trying to find a way to spare her, and was not happy with the original decree. But we'll bracket that, we'll put that aside. ויאמרו נערי המלך משרתיו יבקשו למלך נערות בתולות טובות מראה. Again, the description that's given for what he's looking for is tovat mareh, of beautiful appearance. I think that's what the description was for Vashti. Am I correct? Should be pasuk yud. Yeah, in pasuk yud aleph, actually tovat mareh. Right, so it's consistent that that's what he's looking for. We'll see with Esther, it becomes more than that. In any case, so just to translate it again, so the Narei Melech Mesharatav, the youth of the king, his servants, requested of the king, or for the king, it's really for the king, Narot Betulot, young virgin women that were of beautiful appearance. Again, without going into it, I think it's worth noticing that at this point, he's surrounded by youngsters, right? Narei HaMelech, which is a term we haven't seen before, are going out to find Narot, right? So they're both young, it's parallel. I don't think by coincidence, and we know it's famous with Rachavam, Shlomo's son, so it's famous that he asked the older counselors and the younger counselors for advice, and he took the younger counselors' advice, and he was criticized for it. That led, according to Chazal, that led to the his fall and the splitting of the kingdom that had at the beginning been inherited wholesale from his father Shlomo, and then it became divided. All the other 10 tribes seceded from him. Okay, in any case, Pasuk Gimel, v'yafked hamelach pekidim b'chol medinot malchuto v'ikbetzu et kol na'ara betula tovat mareh el Shushan הבירה al beit hanashim על יד הגה סריס המלך שומע אנשים ונתון Tamru Kehen. Um, so the king appointed appointees in all the different uh, provinces of his kingdom, and they gathered together every uh, virgin young woman that was of beautiful appearance. Again, the same expression, Tovat Mareh, to Shushan, the fortified city, to the house of the women's quarters, which was through Haggis, the Haggis, the person's name, who was again the eunuch, the officer of the king, who was the guard of the women, and they were placed in tamru in their spices and their perfumes. Okay, in other words, to be prepared for their trial, for their interview with the king, and then the Megillah goes on describes how this would proceed. V'nara shetetav b'nei melech timloch tachat Vashti v'yitav adava b'nei melech v'yaschen. Because all that is the plan, right? So the end result of the plan after the women are gathered and put into their perfumes. Right, we'll see later on that this is a year-long process. The young woman that is good in the eyes of the king will, in fact, rule instead of Vashti. And the matter was good in the eyes of the king, and he did this, right? So this is really administrative. Again, it's sort of setting the tone not saying a tone, but giving us sort of a flavor of the Persian monarchy and the pomp and circumstance, often about rather trite things, very earthly type things, but obviously it was taken very seriously by Achashverosh and presumably the Persian monarchy in general. One of the things, by the way, I don't know if I'm going to have another chance to speak about it, so now's a good time. Chazal compare Persia to a bear, right? I think it's important to be aware of that in terms of Persian culture. Now, it could be a lot worse, right? It could be a snake, could be a wolf, right? A bear, I don't think they're speaking so much about its fierceness, even though bears can be fierce, but I think that and I think the Gemara that speaks about Persians as bears really emphasizes the idea that bears are fat. Basically, from a human perspective, they look like gluttons, right? So they're waddling around with all this excess fat, right? So we know they need it for the winters to hibernate, but that's the image that Chazal see in Persia, right? Not a vicious, angry, disgusting nation as much as, by the way, they could have said chazir, they could have said pig, right? Because pig's also like a glutton. But the idea is like all the bear seems to care about from our perspective is getting a good meal. And that's how they saw Achashverosh, which I think comes through in a lot of the, right? All we've seen is partying and women, right? Eating, drinking, and women. That's all that. So, and again, it's not coincidental. This is the way that kingdom was understood by the Jews. Politically very tolerant in general, in spite of the story. But what was of concern was that you brought in lots of taxes. So as long as provinces brought in their taxes, they allowed for a lot of autonomy, which was probably the exact opposite of the Assyrians in particular. I mean, the Babylonians came in between for a short period of time, but the Assyrians were the opposite, that they tried to destroy nations by moving them around and switching them and to what do you call it? To reduce opposition and rebellion, they attempted to destroy nations. Persia had the opposite approach. I mean, obviously, this is thumbnail. Persia had the opposite approach of granting as much autonomy as people wanted, so long as people pay the price. So very different strategies. In any case, here's where I'm Pasuk. Hey, this is one of the Pasukim I wanted to focus a little bit more on. So, Ish Yehudi, Hayav Shana Bira, Ushmo Mordechai, Ben Yair, Ben Shimi, Ben Kish, Ish Yemini. So, even though you may not be familiar with all the names, so Kish is the father of Shaul. So we're dealing with someone who's descended from or related, let's say, to the royal house of Benjamin and Shaul HaMelech. So to translate very quickly, it says that there was a Yehudite man, I should say, in the fortress town of Shushan, and his name was Mordechai, the son of Yair, the son of Shimi, the son of Kish, a Benjamin, well, man from Benjamin, the Kitzur, right? So I started translating Ish Yehudi, and then I stopped because there are two possible translations. What are the two possible translations?
Jewish man?
Anyone?
Either Jewish or he's from the tribe of Judah.
Right, good, excellent, right? So those are the two things. And the question is, well, what does a Jewish man mean? It actually means that he came from Judah, right? In other words, the reason Jews became Jews or Yehudim became Yehudim around this time period is because all the other Jews were gone. Now, that's not entirely true, right? Because as this very pasuk points out, the southern kingdom, which survived longer and survived in exile as well, as opposed to the northern kingdom, which was dispersed, as I mentioned before, by Sancherib, the Assyrian king, and lost, right? So that southern kingdom really was made up of two tribes. That too is a simplification. There were obviously Levites, right? People from the tribe of Levi, Kohanim certainly, and there were also some like today, or much less than today, but as in any time, there's always people who move from one place to another. So there were people in Yerushalayim who were from all the tribes, for example, and any other major settlement in Yehuda would have people from other tribes. But by and large, there were two tribes that were intact in the southern kingdom, and that's Yehuda and Benjamin. Okay, the reason the Jews became Jews and not slash like Yehuda Benjamin people, besides that it's unwieldy and cumbersome. So that's a riot that you shouldn't have a hyphenated name when you get married or if you're married. That's a joke. We have lots of friends who have hyphenated names. But in any case, Yehuda was a much larger tribe than Benjamin. So that's why anybody who was from that area, from that state, eventually became known as a Yehudi, which meant a Jewish national, a person from the nation, the country, the state of Yehuda, not the tribe of Yehuda. Okay, so according to that, there's no issue here. I mean, there's one issue in the sense that obviously, if you tell me that he's from Binyamin, I'm going to know he's Yehudi, right? So why mention the word Yehudi? So there's a bunch of drashot that are given, and it's interesting that Rashi, you've already, I think I've pointed out a couple places, but here also, Rashi seems to be impatient with a lot of the drashot of the Megillah in terms of Peshat in Megillat Esther, which is interesting because well, put it this way, Rashi's impatient because he knows that everybody knows the Midrashim, right? When he's in Chumash, so Chumash is a big book. People don't know all the Midrashim. So Rashi chooses the Midrashim that he feels are worth bringing up. Occasionally, he'll say, there's a bunch of Midrashim I'm not going to tell you because I don't think they're Peshat. right? Occasionally Rashi does that. But here he does it all the time because he's facing an audience who's going to say, I know what it means when it says Ish Yehudi, Ish Yemini, right? Because the Gemara asks as follows, right? It's interesting that it could have framed it in different phraseology, but it repeats the same phraseology. It starts with Ish Yehudi. It almost brackets Mordechai as being Ish Yehudi at the beginning of the verse, and Ish Yemini at the end of the verse. So Gemara asks, it sounds like a contradiction. Is he from Yehuda? In other words, they're learning it not as Yehudi in the Gemara. Is he from Yehuda or is he from Binyamin? Right? So several of the drashot say, well, no. I mean, you can't get out of these from Binyamin because we went through his family tree, right? He's related to Shaul. Shaul's from Binyamin. You can't get out of that, right? But Chazal say that maybe the statement that he's Yehudi doesn't really mean he's Yehudi. And they give all sorts of drashot. One of the drashot is that his mother is from Yehuda and his father is from Binyamin. But if you look at Rashi, on Pasuk Hey, al Shegala im Galut Yehuda, he's called that because he was exiled with the exile of Yehuda, of the Judean state. Kolotan Shegalu im Malchei Yehuda yukfuim Yehudim ben Agoyim v'afil meshevet achehem. So he says, and everybody was exiled with the kings of Yehuda, of Judah, of the tribe of Judah, were called Judeans, right? Judeans began to mean Jews, right? Meaning all Jews were called Judeans, and so we have one word. Amongst the non-Jews, that's how they're called, which makes sense, even if they were from another tribe. It's interesting. I saw somewhere that in historical records of, I don't remember if it was Assyria or Babylonia, they talk about, probably Babylonia, they talk about, yeah, it was Babylonia, destroying the city of Yehuda, right? So Yehuda is the name of this whole area. It's the name of the people. For some people outside of Israel, it's the name of Yerushalayim. Continuing in Rashi, Ishimini mibinyamin haya kach pshuto, right? And the end is telling you that he's from the tribe of Benjamin. This is the simple explanation. Rabbeinu darshu mashidarshu. And Rashi says the rabbis, meaning the Gemara, said what they said. You know, it's nice, it's fine, but it's not pshat, right? Don't give me all sorts of drasha and tell me that's pshat. It's not. Yehudi means Yehudi is very clear what it means. It does not mean a Judean from the tribe of Judah. So Rashi takes a strong position just about all the Pashtanim. The Ibn Ezra also says something very similar. You can take a look at it on your own. Okay, let's go on. So Asher Ogla Miyushalayim im Hagola Asher Hoglata im Yochniah Melech Yehuda Asher Hegla Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel. Right, so he's identified as one of the exiles. You know, he wasn't born in Persia. He was born in Israel, and he was exiled from Yerushalayim with. There were several stages in the exile of the Jewish people. This is one of the earlier stages. King Yochaniah was a protector of Babylonia, and he rebelled and sided with Egypt. In any case, at that point, Nebuchadnezzar exiled Yochaniah along with the elite of Yehuda, Malchut Yehuda, which included apparently Mordechai, right, which was exiled, right, this is the king of Yehuda, who was exiled by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylonia. Okay, another verse I want to focus a little bit on, V'yeh omen et hadasa hi Esther, bat dodo ki ein la avim, v'nara yafat toa v'tovat mareh, ובמות אביה ואימה לקחה מרדכי לא לבד. Okay, so um, so he was um, a guardian of Hadassah, who was Esther, right? By the way, Esther and Mordechai are both Persian names, but Hadassah is a Hebrew name. So here we have both of her names. Presumably Mordechai had a Hebrew name also, but it's not the name he became famous for. Perhaps a little bit like Moshe, perhaps not. But in any case, uh, so he he was the guardian of Hadassah, who was Esther, his cousin, right? Bat Dodo, the daughter of his uncle, because she did not have a mother and father, and the young woman was of beautiful form and beautiful appearance, right? Remember, we had just before Tovat Mareh. So Esther is not just Tovat Mareh; she's also Yafat Toa. Uvemot Avia Veima, and when her mother and father died, Mordechai took her to himself as a daughter. Okay, so here you have the famous drash on the word bat, right? You look at Rashi. This one Rashi accepts, and the Even Ezra also is interestingly um, favorably inclined. He doesn't accept it completely, but is favorably inclined towards it. Look at Rashi, lo levat, Rabbeim pirshu lebayit. So the rabbis explained or made a drasha on this to say it was for a household. The household means leisha, right? That he married her. Okay, so what I want to ask you is, why do you think? I mean, obviously the word bat and bite are similar, but that's not good enough if you want to talk about pshat. In fact, the Torah Tamima, and we'll speak about his explanation. It says, bat means bat and bite means bite. They're two different words. So, what do you think, textually speaking? I mean, I think there's something super textual as well. I mean, I think there's a different reason that goes beyond the text. But do you see any reason in the text itself that would lead the rabbis to such an understanding, and one that's approved by many of the Mefarshim? Anyone?
Could it be lekacha, like he took her, and like taking is like the word used for like currency with kedushin, like you take you acquire.
Right. So that's a very good point. It's definitely part of it, right? So that certainly works in their favor. I'm not sure it's enough to make it the central reason. In other words, for it to be the central reason, it would have to be an unusual phrasing in this context, right? Now, we don't have this context, we don't have adoption very frequently. And certainly a man adopting a woman, right? Which, by the way, I think is part of it. I mean, that sort of builds the context. Here you have a man taking a woman, right? But then it tells us Labat as opposed to Levite. So, but you're certainly right at noticing that 100%. Anything else?
I would guess it might be less related, but when the king was looking for young girls, it said Betulot, and Hadassah is never called Betula.
Well, that's interesting. That's very nice. I said it's very nice because it's new to me. I mean, what Barry said was also very nice, but it wasn't new to me. So, but I like new things. Yeah, that's fascinating that you point that out, that we might well expect in this context, Yafat Torah. Yeah, good. Okay, anything else? Any other possibilities?
That it mentions that she was lovely and beautiful, and it seems like a non sequitur.
Good, good. So that's what the Torah Tamima says, essentially. Torah Tamima says, right, we're looking at their relationship at this point, where we're describing Hadassah in the context of the relationship. The Gra says there are three reasons that he took her, and they're the three reasons described here. Number one, that she is his cousin. Number two, that she's an orphan. Now, the Gra is going to go in a different direction than the Torah Tamim. Torah Tamim says that, the two first reasons, he doesn't speak them out, but essentially he says the other reasons are reasons. The Yafat Toar and Yafat Mareh is an anti-reason. It has nothing to do with it, as Barry said, right? But the Gra says no, right? Which pushes off that reason. We have to go back to what Barry or Katya said, or maybe there are other reasons. But the Gra finds another reason why Yafat Toar and Yafat Mareh might be a reason for him to adopt her. I mean, what's interesting is he doesn't even say, one second. Yeah, he doesn't really explain it, but I think I understand what he means. Why might that actually lead him to adopt her?
Like a vulnerable single person.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Right? Because if she's not beautiful, there's less of a threat. In other words, any young child, youth, whatever it is, needs guardianship. But the more beautiful a young woman, even a young girl is, the more vulnerable is, the more she draws attention in negative ways. So that's what the Gra says. The Gra says that that's the connection over here, negating what the Torah Tamima gives as an explanation. Okay, anyway, just be aware of that apparently this seems to be a strong drasha. So is it pshat? Hard to say that it is, because it should have said so. But there's some insinuation here that there's more to it. Now, the Even Ezra sort of takes a middle path on this. If you want to take a look, one second. No, it's not the Even Ezra. Thought it was. So. No, yeah. Here, it is in the Even Ezra. It says Levat, and if you have it, Ulei Shaita Betula, says the Even Ezra, Lo Haya Mordechai Misaken Ba, Ki Lo Yismach Al Maaseh Nes. Okay, that's what we actually what we just said in the Gra is actually I don't know. Skip that. I don't want to get into that. Ulai, but here's the part I wanted you to look at. Ulai darash labayit. So he says maybe the reason the rabbis interpreted Bat to be Bayit, to be his wife, was to mean shaya b'machshavato b'avor yofya lekachta leisha. That because she was beautiful, he had in mind to eventually take her as a wife, right? And I think it's a nice middle path because it doesn't contradict the pshat. In other words, when Rashi generally explains something and brings a drash, you'll notice it almost always goes along with the pshat. It fits with the pshat. It's not a contradiction to the pshat. Here, even though Rashi endorses it, it seems like contradiction. So Even Ezra is taking both sides. He's saying, yeah, it's telling us that there is a bayit connection. There is a marriage connection, but it's not there yet. And that's why it's telling us that, or not the only reason, but that's one of the reasons it's telling us that she was beautiful. Okay. Let's go on. Pasuk Chet. ויהי בהשמע דבר המלך ודעתו והיקבץ נערות רבות אל שושן הבירה על יד הגיא ותלקח אסתר על בית המלך על יד הגיא שומע נשים. So when the word of the king and his decree was heard, and in the gathering of the many young women to Shushan, the capital city. By the way, you'll notice that this phrase always repeated. It's never Shushan, so it's Shushan Bira. Although it could be it was called Shushan Bira, like New York City, right? Even though we might say, well, it's New York, but it's New York City, so Shushan Bira. Presumably that's what's going on here also. In any case, under the control of Haggai, and Esther was taken, right? You'll notice it's passive, tilakach Esther. She was taken to the house of the king in the hand of Haggai, the guardian of the women, right? So people point out that she didn't volunteer, Esther didn't volunteer, and Mordecai didn't volunteer her either. Don't forget, we know the end of the story. So we're rooting for her to be queen. But at this point, right, that would be a disaster, especially if they're married, or even that they're thinking of getting married, but even not. He's not Jewish. He's also Achashverosh. He's a guy who throws drunken parties for 180 days. Like that's not the idea of a good shidduch. ותיטב הנערה בעיניו ותיסחס לפניו ויבהל את עמוקיה ואת מנותיה לתת לה ואת 7 נערות הראויות לתת לה מבית המלך וישניה ואת נערותיה לטוב בית הנשים. So the woman, meaning Esther, was good in his eyes, in the eyes of this officer of Haggai, and she found, she raised kindness before him, right? This is a phrase that will also need to be the response that people have to Esther is always positive, right, throughout, but it's described differently in different places. So here's the first time we see the response of the woman's officer, right? So she raised kindness before him, and so the way he showed his favoritism towards her is that he rushed the perfumes and her portions to give to her, and the 7 to her, and to the 7 young women that were fitting to give to her from the house of the king, and he distinguished, right? Yishanea, right, from the wording leshanot, right? He distinguished her and her maidens, her attendant women, for the good in the house of the women. He gave them better quarters, right, better treatment. Some Mefarshim say that he saw her as the future queen. He understood right away, and therefore he wanted to treat her as best as was in his control. So right away we have this. She starts charming, again, not intentionally so, but she charms everybody that she encounters. And you probably know the famous drasha about the 7 narot. Why 7? To count the days, so she would know which day is Shabbat, right? In any case, moving on, now is another verse I want to focus on a little bit, though we're not keeping a pace in terms of the time, so let's go a little bit quicker. Lo yigida Esther et ama v'molayata ki Mordechai tziva alea shelo tagid. So Esther did not tell her people, I mean, she didn't tell what her people was, or her birthplace, or home, because Mordechai commanded her, or about her, that she should not say. So here again, this phrase I want you to notice, Mordechai commanded about her. We're going to see this idea of commanding, different people commanding other people. So it's worthwhile remembering this. What I want to talk a little bit about, and if you saw the Mefarshim, is why not say who she was, what country she was from, right? Again, it's going to have a key role in the continuation of the story, but at this point, right, it would seem that no one knows that. So what was the point of not saying over where she was from? So you have diametrically different reasons. The Ibn Ezra gives three reasons, which we'll see in a minute, but I just want to take a quick look at Rashi. Look in Rashi in Pasuk Yud, Shelo Tagid Kedei Sheomru Shehi Mishpacha B'zuya V'Yishalachua Shim Yedua Shim Mishpachat Shaul HaMelech Hayu Machzikim Ba. So says Rashi that the reason was actually to make her undesirable, right? That if he knew that she was from a royal house, that would make her more desirable as the queen, right? They want her to be sent away, right? As we'll see, preferably before she's even with the king. But the idea that she'd be married to Achashverosh on any level, whether she's a Pilegesh or an actual wife, even if she's queen, all of that is viewed as undesirable at this point. So that's what Rashi says. The Ibn Ezra brings three different opinions, and he says Yesh Omrim, sort of in my version, the Divrei Matcha is Vishanea, which is in Pasuk Ted, actually. About 3 lines later, he says, V'yesh omrim, ki Mordechai lo asa nechona shetziva l'Esther shelo tagid ama. It says that Mordechai actually made a mistake by not allowing her to say her nation. Ki fiched shelo yikachena hamelech leisha im yada shehi me'agola. Because he was afraid that Achashverosh would not take her if he knew that she was from this exile, that she was, an exilee, a refugee, right? So there are different aspects about Esther, right? On the one hand, she's from the royal house. On the other hand, she's a refugee. Right, so you can look at both at different sides of her background. It says the Ibn Ezra, at least in the first approach, that really it was a mistake not to build her up. I'm sorry, what's the mistake here? Yeah, he doesn't really explain. I mean, I don't understand what he sees as the mistake. I don't know. Does anybody see what the mistake might be here? Not sure. Anyways, ואחרים אמרו כי בדרך נבואה ובחלום ידע שתבוא תשועה על ידה לישראל. Or, right, another reason is that I said before that Mordechai and Esther didn't know the future. Says Ibn Ezra, how do you know that they don't know the future? Mordechai is a Navi. So maybe he does know the future, and that's why he didn't want to tell her. He didn't want Esther to tell them that she was Jewish. Then the third explanation is he gives, "V'anachon beinai ki asazeh Mordechai b'avur shetishmo Torat Hashem b'seiter." So says the Ibn Ezra, the reason he thinks that Mordechai told her not to tell is that she should be more easily able to keep the Torah that way. That if people knew she was Jewish, they would make life difficult for her in terms of keeping the Torah. But if she did it secretly, she'd have more of a chance of keeping the mitzvot. That's what Ibn Ezra likes. In any case, what's interesting here is that the Megillah does not tell us why. And it's really the fact that we've seen 4 different, one approach in Rashi and 3 in Ibn Ezra, and there are other explanations. Whenever you see all sorts of explanations, it means you have something that's difficult, right? It's really unclear what the strategy was at this point, right? As I said, there are all sorts of different aspects to, I mean, they're basically two sets of variables. This first set of variable is it going to raise her or lower her by revealing her identity? And as I said, there are different aspects because she is from a royal house. Forgetting about the Jewish part, she's she's a whatever. She's part of a royal family. That's impressive and that's important, right? On the other hand, Jews are not doing so well, and she's a refugee, etc. So there are two sides of that. So that's one variable that has two directions. And the other variable is, what are we aiming for? Right? Do we want her to become the queen, or do we want her not to become the queen? Right? So those variables are in play right off the bat. There may be other variables as well. In any case, that's something for us to think about more. Okay. ובכל יום, פסוק י"א, ובכל יום ויום מרדכי מתהלך לפני החצר בית הנשים לדעת את שלום אסתר ומה יעשה בה. So every day Mordechai would jaunter, would spazier, we say in Yiddish, would take a walk in front of the court of the house of the women to know about the well-being of Esther and what was happening to her. Right? And this apparently went on for 3 years, that she was there before she had her audience with the king. And presumably these women are shut in. So Mordechai is speaking to, different officers that are there and asking about her. I wonder if they have visiting hours. I was thinking about that, like in jails, you have visiting hours and like a special room. I don't know how they did it, but it seems very cruel if they can't see anybody. But whatever, it's all culturally bound. In any case, pasuk Yud Bet, והגיע תור נערה ונערה לבוא אל המלך אחשוורוש מקץ היות לה כדת נשים 12 חודש, כי כן ימלאו ימי מלכיהן 6 חודשים בשמן המור, 6 חודשים בבשמים ותמרוקי הנשים. So this verse, the next couple of verses, are this lengthy description of how this process works, right? That when the turn of a woman, each woman would come to go in front of the king Achashverosh after her being, according to the decree of women, for 12 months, because this is how long it would take to fill the perfumes, right? To imbibe the perfumes properly into her skin. 6 months in shemen ha'ma'or, right, type of oil. Another 6 months in other, spices and perfumes of women. ובזה נערה באה למלך את כל אשר תאמר יינתן לה לבוא עמה מבית הנשים ad beit hamelech. Okay, and with this, right, in this way, the young woman would come to the king. Anything that she said would be given to her to bring with her from the house of the women to the house of the king. Right, clothing, instruments, art, whatever, she thought she would impress the king with, right? So that was supplied for her. בערב היא באה, ובבוקר היא שבה אל בית הנשים שני, יד שסגז, סריס, המלך, שומר פלגשים, לא תבוא עוד אל המלך, כי אם חפץ בה המלך, ונקרא בשם. Okay, so this is the bear analogy again, right? In the evening, she would come. The contestant would come in. In the morning, she would leave back. Well, to the second house of the women, which was held by a different guardian named Shashgaz, who was the eunuch, the minister of the king. Who was not, the first one's called Shomer Anashim, this one's called Shomer Pelagshim. Pelagshim is what do you call it? Is concubines or mistresses, right? So she would not, and she was stuck in that status. If she was with the king for a night, She was now in the status of Pilegesh. She would be subject if the king wanted her, he would call for her, and if not, she would just stay there. If she would not be able to come to the king unless he wanted her, the king wanted her and called her by name. Yeah. Okay. ובהגיע תור אסתר בת אביחיל דוד מרדכי אשר לקח לו לבת לבוא אל המלך לא ביקשה דבר כי אם את אשר יאמר הגיא ושלח המלך שומר אנשים ותהי אסתר נושאת חן בעיני כל רואיה. So when the turn of Esther arrived, and we go through her lineage again, right? Well, actually, did we see her lineage? We didn't. No, we didn't see her lineage. So it's interesting that her lineage is only mentioned here, right? So the cousin of Mordechai, who took her for, I'm sorry. So Esther, the daughter of Avichail, who was the uncle of Mordechai, who took her, meaning Mordechai took her as a bat or bayit, if you prefer, to come to the king. When it was her turn to come to the king, she did not request for her anything except that which Haggai, the minister of the king, the guardian of the women, told her. And Esther brought about this time, instead of chesed, we have chen. She brought charm in the eyes, or she had charm in the eyes of all who saw her, right? Presumably throughout this process. Now, not asking for to bring anything. First of all, it's not that she didn't bring anything. She only brought what was recommended to her, right? So what does that mean? Again, depends. Is she trying to be selected or not trying to be selected, right? So some of the Mefarshim who want to say that she's not trying to be selected, saying that she was trying to be as plain as possible. She did not want to impress the king. She didn't want to be chosen, right? Others, like the Even Ezra on Tetvav, if you'll notice there, Lo biksha davar gam zeh le'ot al sichla. This is a sign about her intelligence. Right? This is a very smart thing to do. Right? How so? Because she trusted the expert. Instead of assuming, I know what to do, right? I know from home the best way to attract men, the best way to impress someone, right? I know exactly what to do, which is presumably what all the other women were doing, right? They were all taking, give me this, give me that, right? Whereas Esther was humble and said, I don't know about these things. You're the expert. You're the officer in charge of this whole process. You tell me what to do, right? Continuing, tilakach Esther el hamelach Hashverosh el beit malchuto b'chodesh tziri hu chodesh tevet b'shnat shevet malchuto. And Esther was taken to the king Achashverosh to the house of his kingdom in the 10th month, which was the month of Tevet, in the 7th year of his kingdom, right? So he, like I said, this is 3 years after all the parties. In any case, right? So I want you to notice, and now and as we go on, the names of the months. So most of the Tanakh, we only have the Hebrew names, meaning Chodesh HaSiri, right? We know what Chodesh HaSiri is. We're Jews. We know it's Chodesh Tevet, right? Counting from Nisan, that is, right? And the Torah, we know the first month is Nisan, right? And that Rosh Hashanah happens Chodesh HaShvi'i. So it's interesting that in Megillat Esther, you're going to have a lot of Babylonian Persian months. Okay, so in other words, essentially what the Megillah is doing here is it's translating, right? The way we might translate to an English-speaking audience, right? We'll say, Moshe, meaning Moses, right, to people who are more assimilated. I mean, that's an extreme example, right? Most assimilated Jews know the word Moshe, right? But it appears that this is written for people who won't know what Chodesh Hasiri is. They will know what Tevet is. Tevet is December, right? Same way that assimilated American Jews will know what December is, right? Granted, there's a slight difference in that we're dealing with the identical months, but it doesn't matter. The major question is what they call the months. And for many Jews in the exile, they called it Tevet or Nisan or all these other names that stuck with us, which is a whole other discussion. Okay, moving on. Yud Zayin, v'yahav melech et Esther mikol nashim v'tisahen v'chesed לפניו מכל בתולות וישם כתר מלכות בראשו וימליכיה תחת Vashti. And the king loved Esther from me more than all of the women, and she raised both charm, and doesn't say both, but I'm just pointing out, both charm and kindness before him, right? She drew both of these emotions more than all of the other virgins, and he placed the crown of the kingdom upon her head, and he crowned her in the place of Vashti, right? So this sounds like it's right then and there, right? It's the same night or the morning after. It's not clear that it has to be that way, but it's interesting that the contest sounds like Ahasuerus was planning to go through every single woman and then make his decision. And if you really want the best, right, that's what you're going to do. If there's anything my Havruta was amazed that he would do that. I said, just think of it in other terms. If you really care about a suit and there's a million suits, you want to see every suit until you get to, if you're crazy about suits, you obviously have to be crazy. That's part of the point here, is that it's totally out of proportion. But in spite of all that, right, Esther is able to show such a difference between her and everybody else that that Ahasuerus called off the competition at that point. The Megillah continues, "V'yasa hamelech mishte gadol lechol sarav ve'avadav et mishte Esther v'anacha lemedinot asa v'yiten maset ki ad hamelech." So the king made a great party for all of his ministers and his servants. It was called the Party of Esther, and he gave a discount to all the provinces, meaning discount. Remember, we said they always had to bring all this tax and tribute, so he gave them a break, and he gave presents according to the hand of the king. One of the Mefarshim suggests that because he didn't know what country she was from, he wanted to do good for her country, but since he didn't know which one it was, he had to give to everyone. One of the interesting things in this thing is that Ahasuerus tolerates her not telling over her country, which we'll talk about more next week. But let's just finish the last few psukim. וביקבץ on פסוק י"ט, ויקבץ בתולות שנית, ומרדכי ישב בשער המלך. And when the women, the virgins were gathered a second time, Mefarshim explained to disperse them. This is the women who are still bitulot, they're still virgins, who didn't get a chance to compete. So they're gathered again to send them back home. Right, when that happened, so Mordechai sat at the gate of the king. One of the Mefarshim suggests that he got this position through Esther's influence. Right, we didn't see that he was doing this before. Sitting at the gate of the king seems to be some sort of official position, which only seems to happen at this point in the story. Ein Esther magedet moladata ואת העמה כאשר ציווה עליה מרדכי, ואת מרדכי אסתר עושה כאשר הייתה באומנה איתו. So Esther did not tell her her home or her people, right? It's reversed order for whatever it's worth. Again, there's what to say about this. We don't have time. Like Mordechai commanded her, right? Again, this idea of command, he's commanding her. And the statement of Mordechai, Esther does or would do, just as when she was being raised by him, with him. בימים ההם מרדכי יושב בשער המלך, קצף בגתן ותרש שני סייסי המלך משומרי הסף, ויבקשו לשלוח יד במלך אחשוורוש. Okay, so here we have seemingly a disconnected event, which we all know eventually has an important role in the story. What you should notice is that, again, the sort of God pulling the strings behind the story, that this only happens right after Mordechai becomes an officer at the gate, right? So had he not been an officer at the gate, Mordechai wouldn't have been able to tell Achashverosh about it in order to have Achashverosh read about it and favor Mordechai and encourage Esther and with all these different things that we'll talk about. But there would be no Achashverosh. So as far as Esther having power in the kingdom, that would have conceivably completely disappeared. If anything, right, there's a good chance that Haman would have become even more powerful as a result. Okay, so in any case, so in those days, Mordechai was sitting at the gate of the king. So Bigtan Teresh, who were two officers of the king, who were from the door guards, got angry and sought to send their hand against the king Hashverosh. Vivada hadavar למרדכי ויגד לאסתר המלכה ותאמר אסתר למלך בשם מרדכי. So the thing became known to Mordechai. It's interesting here too. It's passive. It doesn't tell us how. So we say that Chazal understand that they were speaking a language that they thought no one knew. Mordechai knew. In any case, he told Esther, the queen. Interesting here, we don't see how the word was transmitted. Was he able to see her in person or not? In any case, Esther told the king in the name of Mordechai. Right. From this we get the idea of the importance of citing anybody who you're quoting. And the matter was searched and found to be true, and they hung both of them on a wooden pole, and it was written in the book of Chronicles before the king. So as far as this last phrase, Lifnei Melech, me and my Havruta, we had a debate whether in front of the king literally meant before him, it was written before him, or it was just an expression that the book was in front of him. So something to think about. We're out of time. If there's any questions or comments, I'll take them now. Anything? Okay, Perek Gimel is a big one. So I think Perek Aleph and Bet is really setting up the stage for the action. The action starts really happening in Perek Gimel. Stay tuned. Look forward to seeing to everybody, and happy Tu B'Shvat. So this is the beginning of the pre-spring. Okay, be well, everybody.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.